So if consciousness is a biological learning algorithm that we need, in our meta-learning domain, consciousness is necessary to develop learning, then it's quite possible the machines don't need it at all, right? They can just skip this step. You've spoke about insects and plants, and they operate at different time scales, whether they actually need consciousness at the level or the complexity that we have. It feels to me that a machine doesn't really need to be aware of itself to be able to move on to the next level of intelligence. Can it skip consciousness?
Super interesting question. The question is, when you skip consciousness, what is the level after consciousness?
Correct.
And I would say that consciousness might indeed be some intermediate level. Right? At the level below consciousness would be that, for instance, imagine the idea of a philosophical zombie. Philosophical zombie is producing behavior that does not actually involve consciousness, but is just pretending that this is to be the case. And Daniel Dennett said that this notion of zombies is absurd. He gives the example of a zombank, a bank that is very much like a real bank in the sense that you can deposit money there and it's put into some account that is displayed as a number, and you can withdraw that money and it gives you interest and so on. But it's not a real bank because it lacks the true essence of bankness. And this is meant to create an intuition pump that opposes the other intuition pump and tells you, but this notion of this philosophical zombie is just absurd because there is no hidden essence in a bank. Why should there be a hidden essence beyond observable behavior in our own mind?
Why is the essence important? If you don't believe in essentialism, then you don't need the essence.
And it could be because there are some aspects of consciousness where it's not clear how they contribute to behavior. And so the question is consciousness in its nature something that is fundamentally different from behavior? Is what its likeness just a state of being rather than a behavior?
Right.
And this might be a category error because a state of being might also be a behavior, right? And maybe one that's difficult for you to formalize, but it's difficult to actually make sense of it. We don't have very good formalizations of what it means to be conscious. And right, this is an issue that we have to deal with and that we have to acknowledge. So we clearly can construct philosophical zombies. Imagine we build a humanoid robot. And this humanoid robot is not able to think, but you remote control it. And you give this robot a name, maybe you call it Carl, and Carl is doing everything that is in character for Carl. But it's really a character like a character in a novel that you simulate in your own mind, and at never point do you believe that you are Carl. You can also remote control Carl by an LLM. Right? And so at no point would Carl, even though Carl is able to generate self-report in interaction with the environment, would Carl be conscious. And so it would be something that is able to produce human behavior, but it's just a puppet. And so this puppet notion would be equivalent to a philosophical zombie. And the question is, can you create a control functionality for this puppet by something that is itself not conscious?
Right.
And using an LLM, you probably can, right? Or in many circumstances, for some cases you can. Maybe it's not general in the same way, but I think it's good enough for the purpose of our thought experiment. And so the next level would be that you give Carl a model of what it would be like if Carl existed. And that model is being used to move Carl in such a way that the model can recognize and correctly model that it's the model of Carl that is moving Carl around. And so at this point, Carl might develop a first-person perspective, which means it's modeling that the contents of the model are the reality of Carl.
Right.
And this would be this intermediate stage in which you have a first-person phenomenal self-model and you experience yourself as real, because the model is going to distinguish which parts of Carl are real and which parts are not. Right? And there are parts of you where you think, oh, this is not really me. This is just imagination that I had of myself. For instance, last night I had very wild dreams about who I am and what I did. And I woke up in the morning and I felt very confused and I needed to make sense of my dreams and realized this was just an idea of being a person that is not me and has relationships that I don't have and actions that I would never perform. And so you realize, oh, this is just an idea of what it could be like to be a person that was experienced from a first-person perspective, but it has nothing to do with me. Right? And so this is clearly just some simulacrum. And now the next stage would be that you realize that also when you believe that you are you, this is just a simulation. And you are not actually real. And at this point, you switch back to a third-person perspective. And in the state, you might identify with the process that is generating your conscious states. Or you might disidentify completely at all. And simply, there's observation of observation. And it doesn't mean that you lose consciousness. You basically go on a meta level. You will still be able to simulate what it felt like when reality was real to you, but you are now enlightened enough to know this is just yourself, your own mind puppeteering a model of yourself. And so consciousness itself is a certain type of puppet. It's not a puppet that is remote controlled, but a puppet that in some sense is self-controlling, but it's nevertheless a puppet. And once you realize that it's just a control process that is set up in a particular way, that involves its own model as the driver of its own actions, you don't need that first-person perspective anymore. And so I suspect that if you have a self-improving mind, you at some point wake up from the illusion of being a self and having a self. And the self is, well, you have a self in the sense you will have a model of your personality in the world and your role in the world and the interaction with the world, but will no longer be real in the sense that it's a physical reality or in some kind of psychological immediacy, but it's the best thing that you came up with at the moment, right? And so you realize to which degree it's accurate or not, similarly as you might have a model of the developments of the stock market. Right? When you have a model of the developments of the stock market, you might have a naive one where you think this is actually going to happen, and you're so entranced with the model that you perceive this is more real than the data that you're going to see on your screen. But when you are sane, you realize, oh no, this is just a model and it's a certain degree of certainty. And I'm only going to act on that model when the degree of certainty is high enough. And even then, the model is going to deviate from reality. And you discover its true model nature. And I think enlightenment in human beings is that you discover your own model nature. That you are just a model instead of being something that is real. And so an interesting question is, when you build AI, can you skip that intermediate stage and go straight to the model nature?
Right. Can you?
Don't know. Probably.
Probably because, sorry, a lot of these attributes you ascribe to this intermediate nature, happiness, pain, suffering, you've said these all just regulators. And an AI model doesn't necessarily need these regulators. You can just skip.
Yes, that's one aspect. Of course, you might not need these emotions, but the way in which emotions are represented is you basically create a simulation of a world. It's very coarse-grained, right? The colors that you see are not physical colors. They are mental colors. There are mathematical models that your mind is making over the available sensory data. And the same thing, the geometry that you're seeing is not the physical world. It's not Minkowski space. It's not quantum mechanics. What you're seeing is thing that you can construct to make sense of what's happening on your retina and on your skin and how you unify all these modalities. So it's a very high-level coarse game engine that is simplifying reality into something that your brain can efficiently compute and verify using its sensors. It's not better than this. And the same thing is true for your own model of who you are, your psychology in that. And this game engine is measuring the alignment of this agent with its environment. So it's modeling your social interests, how you are connecting to other people, for instance, your relationship status, your friendships, whether you're hungry or not. And then it projects these things, these scores, as feelings into your self-model. And the self-model undergoes unconditional changes because of these updates that are being made by the outer mind. And so something is writing code inside of you, changing parameters inside of you, and you experience these changes as feelings. And when you disidentify with your personal self-model, you will no longer experience these feelings as happening to you. You will observe them as happening to a puppet inside of you, right? And then you can choose to use that puppet to drive your behavior, but you don't have to. And so you might not need to react unconditionally to your emotions anymore because you are no longer you in the sense of a personal self. You can just see what is happening to that puppet and then decide what to do with this, if you want to be that puppet or if you want to be something else. And so this is what you could also build in an AI straight away, right? So the AI is going to build a simulation of an agent in the world and then simulate what changes in the world are happening that are relevant to that agent and how the agent should react to it, and then use the output of that to drive the behavior. And this is also happening in us, but the AI might know right away that this is actually the case, whereas for us, it's a very long road to discovery that we are actually implemented like this.